Great point.
And so if your kids don't talk about it, you can say, well, this happened at work and it really made me nervous. I didn't know what to tell about my performance. So my first thing to do was to retreat to my office. Then I realized that wasn't going to help, so I remembered my strength and whatever, and then went out and talked about that. And then you can turn and say, did you think ever talking to make you nervous? If you do that regularly, they'll learn.
Right. So this is Dr. Collins. She's one of our pediatricians and also one of fabulous collaborators I've had the ability to work with the last couple of years. And what she's saying is if your child isn't doing it themselves, start modeling it yourself. Use an example that's something that happened to you that day and say, you know, this thing happened at my work and I felt really frustrated. And at first I wanted to like confront the person and say that's stupid. But then I thought, gosh, that won't work very well for me. So I tried something different and this is how it happened. And then say to your kid, does that ever happen for you? And remember, when we're telling stories, I like Dr. Collins' example because when we tell stories to our kids, your kids learn so much more from your failures than they do from your successes. So if you're going to tell a story, they love it when you've messed up during the day. They do. Yes. Right. Right. Yeah.
But for some children, that there may be no why. It's literally like just something in the air.
Right. Right. So I'm not going to say that as beautifully as she just said that, but essentially what she's saying is, you know, sometimes knowing the why isn't as important, especially for that child, especially if it's a child that has experienced ACEs, because he or she may not know why or understand their experience. And that's why I was saying before, they may not know the why, but often it's your job to understand the why. And that goes back to a point we were talking about during the break, which is if you are a parent who've experienced a lot of ACEs, you may be triggered by your kid having a lot of feelings, him or herself, right? And so then the question becomes for yourself, to notice I'm being triggered now by my child's very heightened state of emotions. What do I need to take care of myself before I can interact with my child? And we're going to talk about self-care in just a little bit, the ways that you can take a break and learn how to regulate yourself before you push in or talk with your child about their own emotional experience, because it may be triggering, in fact, for you, for them to have such heightened states of feelings because you're being triggered yourself. Great point. Anything else about Yoki feelings? Okay. Family strengths inventory. I use this as kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different areas of research. University of Nebraska-Lincoln, developmental assets. A lot of people measure family strengths. But I want you to think about this for your own family when we talk about how are you strong as a family. There's lots of different exercises that come from this, but individual strengths, environmental strengths, and family strengths. So some families, when I'm working with like care managers, for instance, you can actually do this as a little inventory, but look at all of the strengths that you can point out to the people in your family that are inherent strengths that build resilience for them. Relationships, optimism, flexibility, competence, perseverance, creativity, spirituality, character, humor, independence. Often we point out strengths in other people that we like or that we admire, but we don't necessarily point out ones that maybe we're not as good at or we're not as good at recognizing. So really take time when you're talking to your kids to point out to them things you like about them. I'm running a parenting group right now, a parenting series, and we had this really great conversation about roles that our kids have in our family and roles that we have. And that often we don't stop and go back to our kids and say, you know, who do you think you are in our family? Like, what are the roles or the characteristics that you think we have labeled you with? And what would you like to be? So it can be a really great conversation even over dinner about, what strengths do you think you have, or who do you think you are as a person, and how do we build on those strengths from there? And so this just gives you lots of ideas or examples, things that may not readily come to mind, but that I bet you can find one or two that different members in your family possess. And then there are family strengths. It's good to just take an inventory of our family as a whole system. Are we good at creating routines and rituals? Are we good at communicating, showing mutual respect for each other? So all of these qualities on here are family strengths that we know as psychologists build resilience in families. So you may look at this list again with your partner or with your family and say, hey, let's talk about some of these strengths. What do you think we do really well as a family? And what are some things we could do better? Like, maybe we don't celebrate our family culture really well. A lot of kids don't know, where do I come from? What's my ethnicity? What's my background? We could talk about that more. We don't manage crises very well. We all tend to be kind of stressed out. We could work on that as a family. One of the activities that I often do with families is just creating that we culture. Like, what are our value systems as a family? And you can use this to create a family creed or a family motto or a family crest. Lots of different ways to kind of build on strengths that are inherent in your family. And this could happen over family talks or family discussions where you talk about goals and strengths that you want to have as a family. And then there are environmental strengths. Having a strong parental figure, other supportive adults, connections, ethnic pride. These are all strengths that come from the environment. So how do we find these strengths? Ask each other. Have a family dinner where you're going to talk about, planning your next vacation, or who are we as a family, or just times where you're connecting. We know that families that have dinner together, for instance, on a regular basis, have kids that are less depressed, less anxious, less truant, use less drugs, blah, 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 blah. Guess what? It's not about having dinner together, right? The research, I have parents prescriptively come to me and say, okay, so I have to have dinner with my kids every night because then they won't be depressed. No, you have dinner with your kids every night and talk about nothing. It's not going to help them. The point is, families that connect with each other on a regular basis have kids that are less depressed and anxious, right? Having that regular connection. So we've talked about the circles of support to build connection. We've talked about floor time to build connection. Finding strengths and talking about who are we as the Smith family? Who are we as the Lopez family? And talking about that and building on those are really important so that kids, when they go out into the world, they go, oh, yeah, we don't do math in our family. We don't bully people. We express our heritage proudly. We are a family that prays before dinner. We don't make fun of people of other races, right? It's important that you talk about those things individually and as a family on a regular basis to create that culture. Name them and grow them. So maybe you choose a characteristic that your family's not so great at. And you say, over the next year, we're going to take more risks together. Or we're going to learn how to talk about feelings more. Or we're going to try to have more date nights. Because we know all those things build resilience. Okay? So this is just a way to do some things you might inherently be doing already, but kind of taking an inventory. And that family strengths inventory is in your packets there that you have. And we actually attach the UNL inventory in there, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln inventory, that you could actually go through as a family and create a little checklist. It's not scoring yourself as good or bad. It's just taking an inventory. Okay. So this is an intervention that I specifically talked with parents about when I did a training for Swindells, which is specifically for parents of kids with disabilities of any type, whether it be something like ADHD or cerebral palsy or mental illness like depression, for instance. But it applies to all of us as parents because we all get goals and agendas in our mind about what's right or wrong for our family or for our kid. Let's use an example of, our 5-year-old son who we are sure is going to be a soccer star when they're 5. And when they're 12, they're really telling you that they'd rather be in a theater. but you really think that they're going to be like an NCAA scholarship athlete in soccer, and you keep pushing them towards that. It could be a goal like that. It could be an academic goal that you have for your child who you later find out has a learning disability. It could be a goal that your child be the first person in the play when actually they're somewhat shy and reserved and they'd rather be on the lighting crew. So it could be something related to something very significant happening in your life, or something that has a specific goal for a person in your family. But the point is this: sometimes we have to lay down our goals as parents and connect with our kids and ask them what's important to them. Ask them what they're going through or what they need. It's an opportunity to connect, but it's also a reminder for parents that we have to sometimes put down our goals or set them aside. Doesn't mean you can't come back to them, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't have goals for your kids or expectations. It just means that sometimes we forget to ask our kids, like, how does that feel to you? What do you think about that goal? I didn't realize this, but apparently I've made it very clear to my kids that I think college is important. And the reason I say that with a little bit of guilt is because the other day, my sister was at our house, and she's a cosmetologist. She didn't go to college. And my kids were talking about college in kind of this like pretentious way. And I realized, like, oh, Aunt Jenny didn't actually go to college. She went to a trade school, which I also think is really important. So we had to talk for a minute about, like, wait, goals are different for different people in different families. And if I didn't mention to you that it was also okay to go to a trade school to develop a trade that you're really passionate about, then that was my mistake as a mom. Because what I really meant is find something that you're really passionate about and pursue that to the nth degree. And usually that means now going to college, but it doesn't have to. And so I had to kind of lay down that piece for myself, but it didn't mean I wasn't going to have goals or expectations. So I'm going to skip the planning a trip to Italy thing because it's specific to disability, and we can come back to it if we have time and you'd like me to. But this is a review of those core assumptions that I really have for parents, right? Which is, I really think you do well when you can. Parents do well when they can. Several of you approached me during the break and were like, oh my gosh, I've like totally blown it up till now. I'm so glad we're having this training because I'm going to be a better parent. You haven't blown it up until now. We do the best we can with the skill set that we have at any given time, and we make the best decisions we can as parents. And I've seen parents who are at the depths of despair. I worked not far from here with drug-affected moms and their babies who were trying to get help and get sober so they could have their kids again. They wanted to be good parents. I really believe parents do well when they can. Sometimes we have to set down a goal or an agenda or a preconceived notion about our family or our child for a minute so that we can get back on track with some things that are maybe more important temporarily and then go back to those things later. I also think it's important that we have shared goals and not just one agenda, right? We're checking in with each other as partners, right? You and your partner, you and your spouse, and also with our kids. Remember when we talked about that it's really important for kids to have shared goals and a belief in a bright future and purpose? If we're not saying to our 14, 15, 16-year-olds, what do you want to do to make the world a better place? Not what do I want you to do to make the world a better place? They won't be able to know it's okay to create their own agenda, their own purpose or meaning in life. And then creating space. What does creating space mean? That's a pretty vague term. But I tend to be a pretty opinionated person, I'll be really honest. And so one of the things that I have to work on a regular basis is creating space for my kids to have different ideas than I do, because I'm pretty clear about what's right and wrong. And that's really important when kids are younger. But once they get beyond the age of 7, 8, and 9, they've really developed a pretty good moral compass by then. If you've done a pretty good job as a parent, then it's a matter of letting them flex their will a little bit and see how they make decisions in the world. And if we're always coming down on them, right, and not giving them any room to make a mistake or struggle a little bit, we haven't let them figure out who they are as a person. How do they take the values that you've taught them and apply them to the real world? We have to create space for them to do that, which means we have to let them make some mistakes sometimes, and we'll come to how to reframe that in just a moment. But this whole idea about laying down goals doesn't mean like putting aside your expectations or having none. It just means sometimes we have to take a temporary reprieve and come back to it later, or ask our kid or our partner or other people that are in their system what's important to them. Okay? All right. So as I was saying, some of you told me during the break, you've already lost it, you've messed up everything, right? We're going to talk a little bit about de-escalation strategies and things to do when we lose it. But I want you to first understand how your brain works and how I talk to kids about becoming dysregulated, okay? So you all have this beautiful model of a brain. Hold it up. All right. So this comes from Dan Siegel, and it's a model of a brain. You have this handy little model that you carry around with you all the time to be able to explain to yourself and remind yourself and to explain to your kids how their brain works. So at the bottom part of our hand, this represents our cerebellum and our cerebral cortex, and that's responsible for basic brain function, keeping us alive, keeping us breathing, heart beating, well-regulated body systems, right? Tuck your thumb in. This represents your middle part of your brain, which has your hippocampus and your temporal lobe, and this is your feeling regulation system, your amygdala. It's responsible for your fight or flight response, emotion control center, and it's very well protected, put your fingers over that, by the frontal lobe. And your frontal lobe, as we talked about before, is responsible for organization, impulse control, self-management, attention, planning, organization. So, guess what happens when we become alarmed or upset or angry? We literally, boom, flip our lid. What are we left with? Fight or flight, feelings, right? Open and raw with absolutely no ability to make really good decisions about it. Our executive function has literally gone out the window. We have flipped our lid. And so when your child is completely lost their minds, you having a philosophical discussion with them about why they did that or what they could do differently or how you would really value them to have a more, regulated system is not going to happen because they are in fight or flight, they are in emotion, dysregulation, which means they are only left with their lower brain, which does what? Breathing, heart rate, baseline function. Which means when our kid is like this and they have flipped their lid, the only thing we have left is to get them into a calmer space to help them regulate their body. That means you getting smaller, your voice getting quieter, lights coming down, breathing getting more regulated, you're talking more calmly, because that's going to speak to their fight or flight. It's going to speak to that body control system at the base of their brain, and it's going to say to them, you're okay. We're okay. What does that look like in a baby? Right? I'll tell you a story. There was a family I was working with, a foster family actually. I don't know if any of you are foster parents, but the mom called me and the baby was literally screaming on the other end of the phone. And I could hear it was a drug effect, withdrawal effect cry, a really high-pitched cry. And so I said to the mom, I knew that her husband was this really big dude. And I said to her, okay, who's got the baby? She's like, I've got the baby. I could clearly hear the baby. I said, give the baby to him. And so she gives the baby to him. And I said, get a sheet and wrap him and the baby up together. And so she's like, got a flat sheet, and she was literally wrapping the baby up against him. What was happening to that baby at that moment was what we call co-regulation. All of a sudden, baby was warm, baby was tight, right? They weren't like dysregulated and flailing around. Baby was warm. Baby could hear. And so then I said to her, have him start humming or talking. And he is this big dude. He has this really low baritone voice. So there was this wonderful vibration coming from his chest. And he was doing it really slowly. And you could literally hear this baby, ah, 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 go to regulation. And she's like, how often do we have to do this? And I said, they could sleep like that, as far as I'm concerned, right? That baby needed co-regulation with a person who was safe and regulated themselves. They literally did swaddling. And those of you that have had younger babies or have young babies now, right, we do the little kangaroo carry, the little pouches, the little, oh my gosh, I only have teenagers now, so I forgot the what? The ergos and the baby Bjorns, right? But you have that because, not just because it's convenient, you can still do the dishes, but because then your baby can co-regulate with you. That's really important in terms of getting to that baseline function. Your baby flips their lid too, right? Same thing with toddlers. Get them closer to you, co-regulate. My rule with toddlers and younger kids is as long as you're not hurting me, I can be close to you, right? I want to be there with you. I literally ground myself and sit on floor with kids sometimes when they flip their lid because that's all we've got at that moment is my calm voice. So I've been in really tough situations, psychiatric institutions and mental health hospitals and schools with kids with behavioral problems. And as long as they're not going to hurt me, I'm going to get down on the floor. I'm going to get quiet. I'm going to get small. I'm going to talk to them like this. I'm going to validate their feelings. And all they're really hearing is blah, 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 until they're able to co-regulate with me. What does that look like in teenagers? Right? Teenagers flip their lid all the time too, right? They lose their stuff and they get volatile and reactive. And they're like a toddler in bigger bodies, right? So sometimes you need to get them out and play basketball with them for a minute, or say, we're just going to walk, or we're just going to breathe, or let's just lay down on the floor together here for just a minute. But you have to get them to a place where you can co-regulate with them once they've flipped their lid. After they've calmed down a little bit and you see that frontal lobe coming back over, then you can have some discussions about why you didn't like what they did. But teenagers need the same thing. They need calm, supportive presence. Sometimes, one of the simplest things I do with a kid that's bigger than me, right? Because at a certain point, your kids are going to be bigger than you, is I just go, whoa, okay, I see you. Talking really quietly, right? All I'm doing is being a calm force, saying I'm not going anywhere, I'm here, but whoa. When we can, when they're not freaked out, we're going to teach them how to breathe in an appropriate way so that when they get to those times where they flipped their lid, they have some tools that they can go back to. Right? This is not something you practice and patronize your teenager about. Let's breathe now. They're going to be very upset people. Think about the last time you were upset. You did not want your spouse coming to you and saying, let's just breathe, right? It's a skill set you have to learn when you're calm. And so I call it Dr. Stober's 5x5x5 breathing exercise. So we're all just going to do it for a moment before we move on. So Dan Siegel says we're either right over left or left over right people. And I'm sorry, I'm hitting my microphone. But we feel a little bit better with either hand over heart and hand over belly or vice versa. So first, just figure out which kind of person you are. Usually it's our dominant hand is over our heart, but whichever feels comfortable. And then you want to pay attention to your, what I call belly breathing. Fancy word is diaphragmatic breathing, right? When we're in a trauma response, whether it's us literally as the parent who needs to go calm, collect ourselves, or our kids, this is the type of breathing that will get us out of that fight or flight response, because we're literally tricking our brain and saying to our brain, we are okay, you are calm, you are fine. So I try to get into a comfortable state. You're all sitting down in semi-cramped chairs. So you can either sit back, lean back, put your feet out, or whatever you need to do to get yourself comfortable. With kids, I practice this literally on the floor. I lay on the floor with them when we're practicing belly breathing because I want them to feel completely grounded. But I also tell kids as they get older and they need to use this tool in school, nobody's going to know if you're sitting in school and you're like, you're just going to look like a chill dude. right? Nobody's going to know that you're belly breathing, but you can still kick back. You don't have to be hand over heart or whatnot, right? But this is how I initially teach this to help them be calm and regulated. And so then I say, we're going to take some deep breaths. We're going to go in through our nose and out through our mouth. We're going to go in 5 seconds, out 5 seconds. We're going to do that 5 times. 5 times 5 times 5. In 5, out 5, 5 times. I know people say count to 10 and take a deep breath, but if you haven't learned how to take a deep breath and you're in a trauma response, you don't know how to take a deep breath, okay? So I'm going to model it first because I don't do well breathing and talking all at the same time. And I want you to watch how when I breathe, hopefully my belly is moving and my upper body and shoulders are not, because when we breathe like this, we simulate hyperventilation. And it says to our brains, we are still panicked. Be worried. But when we breathe from our belly, we say to our brains, we are okay. And I know this seems really simplistic, but if you can master mindful, meditative breathing like this, you're like a Zen rock star for coping mechanisms, okay? So, hand on your belly and then watch my stomach. So I'm going to take a deep breath in. And hopefully you saw my tummy hand come out and go back in because I'm trying to do deep breathing. Your lungs actually fill this whole part of your body. Your lungs are pretty big organs. And so when you breathe out and do that diaphragmatic breathing, you're filling your whole lung and diaphragm area with good air and oxygen. You're getting all of that back to your brain so that you can calm down and regulate. So everybody try that. Okay, hand over heart and hand on belly, whichever way is most comfortable. I'm going to count to 5 and 5 again, and I want you to take 5 breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, and try to be really good belly breathers. Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5. Again. 2, 3, 4, 5. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. Do that 5 times. Some of you are sleeping now. That's good. When you do this with your kids, inevitably they're going to start yawning. Some of you are yawning. I see you. Why are you yawning? You just relaxed your body, right? Inevitably your kids will do the same thing. We belly breathe from 1 to 21 in my office, and everybody in between, and parents. We all belly breathe together. If you practice belly breathing, then when you have flipped your lid, you will have something that you can come back to. For little kids, a really good little example is smell the flower, blow out the candle. Smell the flower, blow out the candle. But not fast, slow. Yes, question.
I was just going to ask, I have a toddler, so I don't know what age this kind of applies to, but like thinking about kind of like, I've read about parenting that's like logic or like common sense. So like you're not going to get your, snack right now because we're going to eat dinner in 10 minutes. And like, melting on the floor, like having a fit, about it, versus just being like, well, I already told you we're going to eat dinner, when you're ready to join us at the table, like come, versus like helping you do, like, versus what you're talking about,
right.
Sitting and talking calmly.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance this too? Because you're also like, you don't want to like sit down 100 times a day and like work to deregulate them, but it's like, this is just how we operate.
Right, right. So things like belly breathing, right? These are things you're practicing on a regular basis so that when the crisis happens, you can be a really good firefighter, right? So that way you can say, you see your child is dysregulated and laying on the floor, you look really upset. You look really sad, right? You can use a yoki feeling, right? Maybe you could do some breathing right now. Maybe not, right? Maybe they're just going to throw a fit on the floor right then, right? And you might just use what you're talking about is just a natural logical consequence, which is like, hope you join us at the table when you're ready. The question becomes, how do they know they're ready? How do you know they're ready? Do they have a skill set to be ready? And that's really where this comes in, right? Have you taught them these skills? Because I think what happens is often as parents, we say to our kids, kind of pull your crap together. But you haven't taught them how to pull their crap together, or you send them to their room for a timeout, but they don't really know what to do in their room to calm themselves down, but it's giving you a break, which is not a bad thing, right? Or they're laying on the floor in a meltdown, or they're screaming and kicking. They don't have an alternative behavior, either a way to express their feelings with yoki feelings or belly breathing or recognizing, like, All of North Clackamas School District embrace the flip your lid technique. So I have kids literally come in my office now and they're like, Dr. Stober, my prefrontal lobe just is not intact. I know. If they have that language, then they have something to go back to when they're melting down on the floor. Does that make sense? So the more verbal and emotional vocabulary you're using with your kids on a regular basis, the better they'll get and the better you'll get to use one of those tools and pull them out of your toolkit in that moment of like toddler meltdown, so that you have something that you can go back to and utilize. Which brings up a really good point, right? Just because you are all now like resilience ninjas doesn't mean your kids aren't going to still throw themselves on the floor, right? The hope is that you feel like you have better tools to address it when they do. Kids, these lovely people that we fall in love with, have free will. And so I am a psychologist and I have lots of tools. And my kids still do horrible things. You know, including, I was telling a parenting group recently, my 13-year-old daughter who's like, I hate you. I can't believe people actually pay for your advice. She stormed off. We did not want to talk about Yoki feelings. None of that was happening at that moment. But hope. Code Green. Do we know what Code Green is? Do we need Stephanie here? Okay, it doesn't matter. So even with the best tool set, it doesn't mean that our kids aren't still going to make mistakes, get upset, get frustrated. My hope is that the more tools you have around resilience and coping tools, strategies for connection and intervention, the more competent you'll feel when those hard times come up. Okay? Yes?
So I've used co-regulating a lot, just without these emotions. But then there's some times where I just get like the push away and wanting to change.
Right.
So you just, at that point, you just kind of feel what your child needs and need right now or needs space.
Absolutely.
Don't try to co-regulate.
Right. Right. So the question is, you know, like this mom is saying she's really good at co-regulating with your child and bringing them close, but sometimes your kid doesn't want that, right? That's okay, because one of the important things about resilience is autonomy, right? And allowing your child to develop a sense of autonomy. So it's important for us to respect our kids when they say, not right now, not yet, right? And so a lot of families develop like ways to solve problems, you know, like if somebody's asking for a break, essentially, not right now, right? It's important to come back at some point too and say, okay, now are you ready to either talk with me about that, or do you need a hug now, or are you ready for one? And often kids will come back to you for that once we've given them their space. But remember when we talked about creating space too? It's important, and it sounds like sometimes it's nonverbal, right? So it's being really good at that anticipatory guidance about recognizing, oh, they're sending me a cue right now that they're not quite ready for that hug. I need to respect that and maybe circle back later. Remember, again, related to what another guy was saying earlier, sometimes that will be a trigger for us as parents. Like, oh, is my child rejecting me? Don't take parenting personally. It's
Being in our house,
mm-hmm.
you know, how do I balance that?
Right.
Pushing me away, maybe, but there's no, in the house.
So I would say pushing you away is not the same as hitting you. You have to- Yeah, unless it's very forceful, right? But kids are going to push and kind of be physical with us, but they're not really, right, doing that. Let me finish. It felt pushed away, for sure. And so one of the things I was talking about with Julie, right, at the break, was some of the epidemiology of ACEs, which is we get triggered as parents because of what we've gone through. And so sometimes our kids pushing us away, and I'm not saying this is necessarily what's happening, but sometimes it does feel very personal for us. Or if they just reject us or shut the door or say they don't want to talk to us, because we've had our own ACE experiences. And we're trying now, we're like, dang it, I'm being a really good parent. Like, I'm trying to hug you and you're pushing me away. Parenting is not personal. It feels very personal, especially if you've gone through trauma yourself and you're trying your hardest to be a really good parent. But your kids have their own free will and autonomy, and usually there's a reason why they're behaving a certain way. It's usually developmentally appropriate, and they're trying to communicate something with you. If you give them a little bit of space, they'll probably come back to you if you respect that. And it sounds like you're really good at anticipatory care and kind of recognizing, oh, he needs something or she needs something. but then they pushed me away, that doesn't mean you were wrong. It just means they weren't quite ready for it yet, and you circle back. Great question, though. Okay. So, de-escalation strategies. What to do when nothing else is working. So, what are some, remember when we talked before about the compassion-informed care training and hearing people's stories, right? And trying to understand them versus thinking what's wrong with them. So think about your child or your partner, right? We're creating resilient families here. So what are some assumptions we should make about angry or oppositional or even just grumpy or sad or what are some assumptions we should make about them? What do you think?
They had an ABC also, and we're seeing the B, the behavior of grumpy and sad, but we don't know what the antecedent was.
Perfect. So they had an ABC, right? That we're seeing their behavior, the B, but they probably had an antecedent that happened just before them that made them feel grumpy, right? Anything else we should assume about people who are angry or oppositional? Sorry? They're feeling hurt. Right, they're coming from it from a place of hurt or trauma or disadvantaged background or feeling, unseen or unnoticed prior. Absolutely. Yes, good. What else?
That's when they need us close.
That's when they need us close. Absolutely. People who are angry are sending off what message? Back off. Back away. But really, we might assume that they need someone to be close. They need someone to be sensitive. Anything else?
Want to be heard?
They want to be heard. Think about people of minority culture or people who've experienced special education systems who've already felt like their story wasn't important or they already know how the story is going to end. They're pissed, rightly so, from the beginning because they haven't felt heard. And so just interacting with someone who's angry or oppositional might be because they haven't felt heard. And now think about, what do you need when you're upset or frustrated with progress or access to support or getting help from someone? Think for a second, what is the number one thing you need when you feel angry or upset or frustrated? To be heard. What else? Space. What else? Support. Compassion. Compassion. So I want you to think as parents, right? When we're interacting with our kids, when we're interacting with our spouse, sometimes we're getting triggered by things because either we misunderstand or we don't know what's happening for that person, or we're having our own trauma trigger, or we're responding to the behavior we think is happening in our child. But if we just think for a second, what are some of the assumptions I should make when this person's upset or angry with me? They probably feel unheard. Maybe they feel misunderstood. Maybe they need space. Maybe they feel lonely. They probably need someone to listen, someone to be close to them. And then I always think, especially when we're talking about ACEs, all of you, when I first put up those first 10 ACEs, counted yours, right? You carry that story with you every day. So does every single other person you interact with, including your partner, including your children, including their teachers, including your friends. So when you're aware, first of all, what is my story? What are my ACEs, if you will? And knowing that when I interact with these other people, the more I know them and the more I understand myself, the more I'll understand my own triggers. And the more I'll know, oh, this is not a them thing, this is a me thing, right? Like I'm getting triggered right now because my mom was mentally ill. Or this is not a me thing, this is a them thing. Like my partner's struggling right now because he was beat when he was younger. And the way we're parenting together now isn't working as well. So the more you're aware of self, the more you're aware of other, the more compassionately you'll respond to other people, and the more sensitively you'll recognize, oh, I see something else is going on with this situation. It's not just so clear about the behavior that I'm seeing in my child or in their friend or in their teacher or in my partner. There's probably something else going on. And just like I need to be heard and listened to and supported, or need space, or need to be cared for, or just need someone to say, what can I do for you? How can I help? Sometimes we just don't know. And the most powerful thing we can say to someone else is, how can I help? And sometimes they won't know. And the only thing then you can do is just be present. Our teenagers often do not know. Sometimes we have to say to them, can I just sit here? What if I just sit here with you? You don't even have to tell me why you're sad and upset. I'll just sit. I'll just be. So, how does that tie back to resilience? I want to keep bringing it back every time. When you have supportive people in your life who are connected to you, it helps you build greater coping strategies because it feels like you matter. It feels like you can go through whatever hardship it is and see it as something you can overcome versus something that will take over your whole life. So these are just some examples. These are things we've talked about already. Lay down your goals, listen, validate, empathize, don't personalize. These are things we already reviewed. And finally here, in the last 15 minutes or so, I want to talk about how we take care of ourselves. This is the baseball analogy that I talk about with families. Imagine, well, this is a good color. It's a happy color. Can everybody see this? Good. Okay, so here's a baseball field. Home plate, you stand here to hit the ball. And on first base is self-care. On second base is care for your partner or your spouse, or if you live with your mother or another partner. And then the third base is care for child. Okay? And the outfield are all the ancillary things, your job, your other community groups. But for the sake of discussing self-care, we're talking about just the people that live in your home. Yourself, your partner, your child. I know that not all of you have partners, so it might be a significant other person in your life. But you're standing at home plate, and you hit the ball. Where do you run? First base. Anybody ever been to a game with 5-year-olds? They run to third base. They help each other find the ball and take it back to the second baseman. But if you really want to hit a home run, you have to stand at home plate, hit the ball, and you must first run to first base. In other words, if you are not taking care of yourself, you cannot take care of all the other people in your life. And you can tell me 1,500 excuses why you're not taking care of yourself first, because you don't have time, because you don't have energy, because nobody makes you a priority. But I can tell you one thing, if you don't make you a priority and you don't get good self-care, you will not be as good of a partner or a mom or a dad as you think you can. Self-care is very important, and it has to happen on a regular basis. And you have to make an appointment. I know all of you, if I said to you, tomorrow you have your medical appointment with Dr. Mashofsky, who's your pediatrician, at 10 o'clock, none of you are going to miss that appointment, right? Because you hit the ball and you run to third every single time. But if you had an appointment to go to the gym tomorrow or meet a friend for coffee and something came up, you skip that, don't you? And you run to second base. Or, I don't know, you run to the outfield, back to the office to get some document. But I want you to start running here, to think about running here. Why is that important? Because as mental health professionals, we talk about the triad of wellness. If all else is failing, right? Like, we can talk about depression symptoms and coping strategies, but our baseline is this. You must eat regularly, you must exercise on a regular basis, and you must sleep well, 7 to 9 hours a night. If you're not doing those things, we're going to start there, right? So I know all of you that are superhuman, who are like running the bake sale and working 70 hours a week, but you're not eating, sleeping, or exercising, you're not taking care of yourself. And for kids, I add this other component that's really important. Not that it's not important for you as adults too. It's hard to see. Socialize. Especially for teenagers. their support group's really important for them. So eat, sleep, exercise, and socialize. For both parents, it's important, and for kids, it's important. Okay. Let's talk about what I call a reframing skill. And this is going to reiterate some of the things we've already talked about. As psychologists, we call this a reframing skill. Essentially, what it means is thinking about something a different way, right? So when we're building resilience for self-care and for the care of our kids, it's important to talk about when we fail at something, whether that's going to be a stumbling block or a building block. Remember, we talked about developing competence. Sometimes it's just in your language. We grew up, we're raising kids and have raised kids since the early 90s in a positive psychology lens where we've thought it's really important to build kids' self-esteem all the time. So your kids are getting ribbons and trophies for everything. And you know what that means? There's a whole bunch of really special, not so special people. But instead, what's that?
We created millennials.
Right. And so there's a lot of discussion around millennials and some of that entitlement, which is a whole really great TED Talk by Simon Sinek if you want to watch something like that. But yes, essentially in the age of positive psychology and self-esteem developing, what we did is we rewarded kids for just showing up all the time. And what we've learned now as we're moving into this next generation is that it's important for your kids to fail, right? Utilize those failures to build strength. Teach your kids to see a challenge versus being a problem solver, and don't helicopter them. There's a beautiful book called The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. I don't know if anybody's read that. It means exactly what it says, which is let your kids fall. Let them get scuffed up a little bit. If they fall and they get scuffed up a little bit, right, we want them to make those small mistakes when they're still getting parented by you lovely people, because they're going to go out into this big, big, bad world where people don't give a heck if they fail, right? And there's not going to be anybody there to support them. So we want them to fail in the protectiveness of your house because that builds resilience for them. It makes them be stronger individuals. Having a hardship like a broken leg that they have to sit out a basketball season for, or failing a test because they didn't study in time, or not getting invited to a play date, those are things that build resilience in our kids over time because they learn how to manage things in the face of crisis. Now, those were pretty minimizing examples, right? What about if your kid's being bullied or your kid has been hurt some way, right? Those are still ways when we talk in psychology to kids, we talk about creating a narrative for them to look at this through a lens that has created strength and resilience in them rather than creating a feeling of being defeated. Does that make sense? Yes.
As an educator, what do you do to help those helicopter parents that don't want their kids to go to fail?
So,
Do the homework for the kids.
Yeah.
And the math and the C, or you know what I mean? Like, what do you do to try to help the parents that are stuck in that?
So the question is, what do you do as an educator when parents are stuck in being that helicopter parent and they don't want their kids to fail? Speak to the fear. I always go to, what is your fear? Do you feel like your child can't cope with this? Do you feel like they don't have the skill set to? Are you worried they're going to not make it through college because they didn't get an A on the 5th grade math test? And then I talk to them about why failure is important. Failure is important for all of us. It develops grit. It helps us bounce back. Being faced with any kind of adversities will make us stronger if we allow ourselves to see it that way, and if we have positive people and supportive people in our lives that help us bounce back and give us those appropriate coping tools. And I'm talking about small t, like failing 5th grade or failing a test, something very small, to survivors of sexual abuse that I work with. I talk with them all the time about how the reason we call you survivors instead of victims is very important. Because you have survived something that many people will never experience, and you can get stronger from it. You can learn from this and be a stronger person because of it versus in spite of it. So there's a lot of reframing that we use in psychology to talk about that building strengths and how important that is. There's a hand I thought I saw somewhere. Yeah.
My question is, it's important for us to teach our children that it's okay to fail and to be resilient to that. But as a parent,
Mhm.
So when my 3.5-year-old has flipped the lid and nothing is going as planned, and she's throwing things and she's screaming at a pitch that is like no human being should be able to reach. When she's doing that, I'm afraid I'm going to fail as a parent if she doesn't learn discipline and respect at home. Like, not like in a negative sense, but I mean, if she can't respect her parents, if she can't respect,
Yeah.
this is how things go in our household type stuff. Like when they get out in the world, I will have failed if my daughter has no manners.
Right. So what happens is that while our kid is flipping their lid, we flip our lid too. Right? They flip their lid, they're falling apart, and we've already decided that they're going to be like failures as adults because they're like completely dysregulated right now. Your only job in that moment is to be fully present with your child. If you can be fully present with your child in that moment that they are freaking out and flipping their lid, and you can be the only person who's down here in that calm, regulated space, I promise you your kid actually won't be that person later on who doesn't know how to regulate and respect because they had an adult who was present for them that supported them and co-regulated with them. But if you freak out, like I know many of us do, not right, and you say, "What is the matter with you? Do you know that if you do this, you're never going to learn how to do anything in this world?" Right? Which some of us do because we're freaked out, right? We have our own triggers that are happening in our brains. If instead you can be calm and present with them and just be in that moment and know that my only job is to be fully present for my child right now, this will pass. This will pass. People ask me all the time, like my kiddo got hit in the back of the head with a basketball when he was standing outside. He was 3 years old. The basketball hit his head and then his head hit the curb. And two of the adults that witnessed this started screaming at the older kids that were playing basketball. And I just kind of scooped up my kid and went inside. And somebody said to me later, "How did you stay so calm?" And I said, "Because I have never seen a situation where me freaking out more helped." I don't know if any of you have seen that situation help, but usually we need more calm, co-regulated behavior. And so if one thing you take from tonight is I must first start with me, right? I have to be calm and regulated first. I might have to do that deep belly breathing. I might have to take a time out. I need to know what my triggers are, what my ACEs are, so that I can better interact with my child. Then guess what? You're not failing as a parent. You're here tonight because you give a crap as parents. And that can't be understated, right? If we're trying every day, then we inherently haven't failed as parents. This whole idea from Glennon Doyle, when we look at the word disaster, it comes from two parts of the same word, dis and astro. Dis meaning without, and stars from astro, without stars. So it would only be a disaster, that meltdown that you're seeing on the floor, if you lose all awareness of light. But I promise you, if you're a parent who shows up, you try your very best, sometimes you're going to mess it up. I mess it up all the time. Like I said, I've got my 13-year-old screaming at me, walking away, telling me she can't believe people pay me for this advice. I mess up parenting all the time. But you know what? I turn around, I make repairs, I say, let's try this again. What can we learn from this? And we go back to all these tools. I use the same tools with my kids that I'm teaching all of you, and we try again. And that's what strong, healthy, resilient families do. We try again and again, and we go back, and we reframe it, and we try it again, and we talk about it, and we make repairs. And as long as you're doing that, you're not failing as a parent. Okay? Yes?
Where we have
Yeah.
as a way of looking at it.
Great. It's okay. I won't be able to paraphrase all of that, but essentially what she's saying is, if we can look at parenting in this broader context of something like a religion, like something that there's a broader perspective of what we can look for or be guided by. And I would say, whether you're religious or not, an important thing about parenting to give yourself every day is grace and forgiveness. Knowing that if you're in this with, you're doing the very best you can. You're going to make mistakes. You must forgive yourself when you make mistakes and go back to these things that you know work. And the more we make mistakes and we show our kids how we make mistakes but we still endure, that in and of itself is building resilience for them. So, just a few reminders. We're right at 9 o'clock here. The core assumptions are important. Remember the resilient house, unconditional love, we language, shared goals, being a model for your parents. And remember that resilience is not just coping, right? It's not just coping tools. It's about relationships and future building. Reminder to advocate for yourself and your child when needed. Know that you have inherent strengths as a parent. You can use these interventions prescriptively. Give yourself a goal or something that you're working towards, and try a new one once a month or once every 6 months. Find your support people. Know who your primary support people are, and know that self-care is important. So we've kind of asked questions throughout the time, and I don't want to keep people for more questions because it's 9 o'clock. I want to respect your time. Let me say 2 really important things. First of all, in your folder, there is a questionnaire. Because we were so wonderfully sponsored by Pacific Source, part of our grant is collecting outcome information. So if you wouldn't mind filling out the evaluation that's in your folder. And on your way out, there is a sign-up sheet too. I do a parenting class on about a 6-week basis. And if you'd like to be part of an upcoming parenting class, you can put your name and email on there. Feel free to sign up for that when you turn in your evaluation sheets.
The evaluation box is on your way out next to the sign up for the parenting class.
The evaluation box is on your way out near the sign up for the parenting class. But other than that, I just want to thank you for your time. It's a weeknight. I know you all have gotten away from your kids and your families tonight. Hopefully you feel like this built a little bit of resilience in you. I'm going to hang around and answer questions for those of you that are okay to linger for a minute. But otherwise, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.